Everything you've been told about being chosen is keeping you powerless. Yes, you're different. Yes, you see things others miss and feel things more deeply. But the moment you attribute this to divine selection, you give away your agency. What if feeling like an outsider is the key to your next breakthrough? What if I told you that your heightened sensitivity and deep intuition have nothing to do with being picked by the universe and everything to do with specific psychological and neurological traits? Studies show these traits correspond to measurable brain activity patterns that you can understand, harness, and amplify. The real question isn't whether you're chosen, it's what you're going to do with your difference. In the next few minutes, you'll discover the hidden wiring behind your superpower and 3 simple steps to harness it. But first, we need to examine something that might make you uncomfortable. Why would evolution create people who feel fundamentally disconnected from their own species, unless that disconnection served a vital purpose? This question cuts through centuries of mystical explanations and gets to the biological truth about your difference. You weren't chosen by divine forces. You were shaped by evolutionary pressures that needed certain individuals to think differently, see patterns others miss, and question the status quo when everyone else accepts it without thought. Your heightened sensitivity isn't a spiritual gift from above. It's an evolutionary adaptation that kept our ancestors alive. While most humans developed strong social bonding mechanisms to survive in groups, a small percentage developed something else entirely. They became the early warning systems who could sense danger before it materialized and read environmental changes that others ignored, spotting subtle shifts in group dynamics that predicted conflict or opportunity. Society has wrapped this biological reality in mystical language because it doesn't know what else to do with people who operate outside normal parameters. When someone processes sensory information at levels that overwhelm typical nervous systems, when someone notices patterns that others can't see, when someone feels emotional resonance so deeply it becomes almost unbearable, we call it spiritual sensitivity. We create elaborate stories about divine selection because the alternative requires acknowledging that human neurology exists on a spectrum that challenges our understanding of normal. Throughout documented history, the individuals who pushed civilization forward were the ones who couldn't fit into existing social structures. They were the ones who questioned religious doctrine when everyone else accepted it, who saw scientific possibilities when others saw only established fact, who imagined social changes when others saw only tradition. These weren't divinely chosen individuals. They were neurologically different individuals whose brains processed information in ways that allowed them to see beyond current limitations. But these same traits that provided survival advantages in earlier environments now feel like burdens in modern society. So why does your brain still light up at the slightest change in tone or temperature? Your nervous system, designed for detecting subtle environmental changes, gets overwhelmed by constant digital stimulation. Your pattern recognition abilities that once predicted natural cycles now spiral into anxiety when applied to information overload. Your emotional sensitivity that once helped navigate small tribal groups now leaves you exhausted by mass social interactions. This disconnect between your evolutionary wiring and modern demands explains why you feel different without requiring any mystical explanation. Your brain literally processes reality differently because it developed to serve different functions than the majority. When you experience intuitive knowing, you're accessing rapid pattern recognition systems. When you feel energy from others, you're using heightened mirror neuron activity. When you sense things before they happen, you're processing subtle environmental cues below conscious awareness. Understanding neurodivergence in spiritual communities reveals how many people experiencing these traits gravitate toward mystical explanations because mainstream psychology hasn't provided adequate frameworks for their experiences. The spiritual community offers validation for perceptions that medical professionals often dismiss or medicate away. But this validation comes with a cost. It keeps you believing your power comes from external sources rather than recognizing it as your natural neurological inheritance. Your unique perspective isn't the result of divine intervention. It's the product of specific brain structures, neurotransmitter patterns, and sensory processing differences that can be measured, understood, and optimized. This scientific understanding doesn't diminish your abilities. It empowers you to work with your neurology intentionally, rather than waiting for spiritual guidance to explain what your own nervous system is trying to tell you. But there's something else happening here that goes deeper than biology. Society operates like a massive sorting machine, systematically creating categories of people who fit and people who don't. Educational systems, workplace cultures, and social structures all reward conformity while treating authentic expression as disruptive behavior. This isn't accidental. Outsiders often become the target audience for solutions promising belonging. Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to discuss. Isolation doesn't create spiritual seekers by accident. It creates them by design. When you spend enough time alone with your thoughts, when you feel disconnected from the people around you, your mind naturally starts searching for meaning beyond the physical world. This isn't divine calling. This is psychology responding to social deprivation in predictable ways. I remember sitting in 3rd grade watching my teacher's face change when I asked why we had to memorize facts instead of understanding how they connected. "You're too sensitive," she said. The same phrase I'd hear countless times growing up. That moment taught me that my way of processing information was somehow wrong, that my questions were too much, that I needed to learn how to think like everyone else. The idea that you're spiritually chosen might actually be your psyche's sophisticated defense mechanism against the pain of not fitting in. When society repeatedly sends the message that your way of being is wrong, your mind has two options: accept that you're defective, or create a narrative that transforms your difference into something special. The chosen one identity serves this second function perfectly. It takes the sting out of rejection by reframing it as evidence of your elevated status. Spiritual communities understand this psychological vulnerability better than you might realize. They offer immediate acceptance for the very traits that mainstream society rejected. Your sensitivity becomes a gift. Your social awkwardness becomes evidence of your spiritual advancement. Your inability to connect with conventional people becomes proof of your higher calling. This validation feels incredible after years of feeling wrong, but it comes with hidden costs. You become dependent on maintaining your outsider status to preserve your sense of specialness. The concept of specialness operates as a powerful coping strategy for trauma and rejection. When your early experiences taught you that being yourself led to pain, your developing identity had to find ways to make that pain meaningful. The chosen one narrative accomplishes this by suggesting that your suffering wasn't random cruelty, but purposeful preparation. Your childhood loneliness becomes evidence of your unique destiny. Your family dysfunction becomes the catalyst for your spiritual awakening. Social media amplifies these feelings exponentially by creating curated highlight reels that make authentic human experience look inadequate. Everyone else appears to have effortless connections, while your reality of deep processing and careful relationship choices looks deficient by comparison. The algorithm feeds you content about being different because your engagement patterns signal that this topic resonates with your insecurities. Understanding these social programming patterns reveals something crucial about your actual power. Your difference isn't mystical validation. Its sensitivity isn't divine assignment. These are natural human variations that society has taught you to interpret through spiritual frameworks because it lacks better explanations for neurological diversity. What would happen if you saw your outsider status not as a defect but as your greatest asset? The answer lies in understanding what's actually happening in your brain when you experience what others call spiritual sensitivity. What you experience as spiritual sensitivity operates through specific, measurable brain structures that researchers can now observe and quantify. Your heightened perception isn't mystical energy flowing through you. It's your nervous system processing sensory information at rates and intensities that differ dramatically from the majority of the population. Brain imaging reveals that people with these traits show increased activity in the insula and mirror neuron systems. The insula processes internal bodily signals while mirror neurons help you feel others' emotions, explaining your uncanny ability to sense what others are experiencing. Highly sensitive people process information differently at the cellular level through what scientists call sensory processing sensitivity. Your neurons fire more frequently in response to subtle stimuli that others never consciously register. Your brain dedicates more resources to analyzing incoming information, which explains why you notice details, emotional undercurrents, and environmental changes that completely escape other people's attention. This isn't intuition in the mystical sense, it's rapid pattern recognition happening below conscious awareness. Scientific studies confirm these traits are neurological and measurable. Specific gene variations influence how your brain responds to stimuli, affecting your emotional reactivity and depth of processing. You inherited a nervous system designed to detect subtle environmental changes, which served crucial survival functions for our ancestors, but creates overwhelm in modern environments filled with constant stimulation. Without understanding these neurological differences, your sensitivity feels like a burden, because you're trying to function with a high-performance nervous system in a world designed for standard processing. Your brain processes emotional information more deeply, picks up on social dynamics others miss entirely, and notices environmental changes that would require conscious effort for most people to detect. When you don't understand why this happens, you either think something is wrong with you or attribute it to supernatural causes. Your sensitivity connects directly to creativity, intuition, and pattern recognition through increased neural connectivity. The same brain structures that make you emotionally reactive also enhance your ability to synthesize disparate information into creative solutions. Your heightened awareness feeds raw material to pattern recognition systems that can identify trends, predict outcomes, and generate insights that seem to come from nowhere. This explains why sensitive people often become artists, innovators, and thought leaders, despite feeling socially disconnected. Trauma amplifies these natural neurological traits by keeping your nervous system in a heightened state of alertness. When your brain learns to scan constantly for potential threats, it becomes even more sensitive to subtle environmental cues. Past experiences can turn your natural sensitivity into hypervigilance, making normal levels of stimulation feel overwhelming. But trauma doesn't create sensitivity. It intensifies neurological traits that were already present. Understanding the science amplifies rather than diminishes the power of these traits, because knowledge creates options for optimization. Now you have the power to redesign your environment to support your nervous system. When you understand your genetic predisposition toward sensitivity, you can develop strategies that work with your neurology instead of against it. Neuroplasticity means you can actively reshape how your brain responds to sensory input and emotional experiences. Through conscious practice, you can strengthen neural pathways that support emotional regulation while reducing reactivity to overwhelming stimuli. Your sensitivity becomes a tool you can refine, rather than a burden you must endure. But there's something else your unique wiring has been preparing you for, something that happens when you step away from the noise. Your periods of isolation weren't wasted time. They were your personal research and development laboratory where your most important breakthroughs happened. While other people developed their ideas through social validation and group consensus, you developed yours in the pure space of unfiltered thinking. This isn't romantic nonsense about the tortured artist. This is the practical reality of how breakthrough thinking actually occurs. Solitude creates the mental conditions necessary for innovation because it removes the constant input and feedback loops that keep most thinking conventional. When you're alone with your thoughts for extended periods, your brain stops filtering ideas through social acceptability and starts exploring possibilities that group thinking would immediately dismiss. Your sensitivity to others' opinions and energy, which feels overwhelming in social situations, becomes an advantage in isolation, because it's no longer interfering with your natural thought processes. The difference between chosen solitude and imposed isolation determines whether your alone time becomes productive or destructive. Chosen solitude feels invigorating and spacious because you control the duration, environment, and purpose. Imposed isolation feels draining and creates rumination loops because external circumstances force the separation, and you spend mental energy fighting the situation rather than using it creatively. Historical innovators consistently demonstrate this pattern of leveraging outsider status for world-changing contributions. Tesla worked alone for years developing ideas that seemed impossible to his contemporaries. Darwin spent decades in relative isolation, developing evolutionary theory that challenged fundamental assumptions. Virginia Woolf created literary innovations during periods of social withdrawal that later influenced entire generations of writers. These individuals didn't succeed despite their isolation. They succeeded because their isolation allowed them to think beyond the limitations of their social environments. Extended periods of social disconnection develop specific cognitive skills that social people never acquire. Trust in your own judgment without external validation, tolerance for uncertainty and incomplete information, and the ability to generate internal motivation rather than relying on external encouragement. You learn to sit with the discomfort that comes with exploring ideas that challenge conventional wisdom. Productive, creative space requires intentional structure rather than passive endurance of alone time. You need dedicated physical environments that support focused thinking, regular schedules that train your brain to enter creative states predictably, and systems for capturing and developing ideas before they disappear back into unconscious processing. Healing solitude energizes and clarifies your thinking through purposeful activities, creative projects, and learning goals. Destructive isolation depletes you through rumination, passive entertainment consumption, and dwelling on problems, without taking action toward solutions. Your lonely periods weren't punishment for being different. They were preparation for contributions that required thinking beyond current social limitations. Every hour you spent feeling disconnected from others was actually time spent developing the mental independence necessary for original thinking. Every experience of not fitting in was training for the ability to stand behind ideas that others haven't accepted yet. Your greatest breakthroughs probably happened during your most isolated periods, because isolation removed the social pressures that normally constrain your thinking. Understanding this allows you to intentionally create conditions that replicate your most productive mental states, rather than waiting for isolation to happen accidentally. But once you've developed these breakthrough insights, the question becomes how to share them with others who can actually understand their value. The difference between finding community and creating it determines whether you build relationships that drain your energy or amplify your power. Consider two groups of sensitive people. The first meets weekly to discuss their struggles with being misunderstood, sharing stories about family dysfunction and workplace overwhelm. They bond over shared wounds but rarely move beyond validation. The second group collaborates on creative projects, challenges each other's limiting beliefs, and celebrates individual breakthroughs, even when they create temporary distance. One stays stuck in mutual therapy, the other builds something meaningful together. You don't need to find your people, you need to create your community. This distinction matters because waiting to be discovered by like-minded souls keeps you in a passive position, where your connection depends on chance encounters and perfect timing. Creating community puts you in control of building the relationships that actually support your growth and amplify your unique contributions. The passive approach of spiritual seeking attracts people who want to be rescued, rather than people who want to grow. When you position yourself as someone searching for your tribe, you magnetize others who are also searching, creating groups of people who bond over what they lack, rather than what they offer. These communities feel warm initially, because everyone understands the pain of not belonging, but they rarely evolve beyond mutual validation of shared wounds. Identifying others ready for genuine growth requires looking for specific behaviors. They take consistent action toward their goals, accept feedback without becoming defensive, and demonstrate curiosity about perspectives that challenge their current thinking. People ready for growth invest time and resources in developing their capabilities, rather than just talking about their potential. How much stronger would your confidence be if you only connected with people who challenge you to grow? Communities that keep you dependent reveal themselves through subtle patterns. They discourage individual success that might threaten group cohesion, create internal hierarchies based on spiritual advancement rather than practical contribution, and focus conversations on problems rather than solutions. Attracting relationships based on authenticity rather than shared wounds requires becoming the kind of person who operates from strength rather than need. This means developing your own emotional regulation skills before seeking others to understand your sensitivity. It means building your own sense of purpose before looking for others to validate your path. Maintaining individual power while building meaningful connections demands understanding that healthy relationships enhance rather than diminish your autonomy. You contribute your unique perspectives while remaining grounded in your own values. You support others' growth without taking responsibility for their emotional well-being. True community forms around people who are actively using their gifts, rather than just talking about having them. These individuals demonstrate their capabilities through consistent action, create value for others through their unique contributions, and maintain the kind of personal development that allows them to support others without losing themselves in the process. In a moment, you'll get a clear plan to protect your energy and scale your impact with your tribe. But understanding community dynamics means nothing without practical systems for implementation. Here's your concrete action plan for transforming neurological differences into practical advantages. Your sensitivity remains a burden until you implement specific practices that harness your heightened perception as a deliberate skill, rather than something that happens to you. The foundation starts with energy boundaries that protect your hyperactive neural pathways while keeping you available for genuine connection. Create physical boundaries by identifying the environments where your sensitivity becomes overwhelming versus where it feels manageable. Notice which lighting, sounds, textures, and spatial arrangements support your nervous system versus which ones drain it. Design your living and working spaces to minimize sensory overload while maximizing your ability to process information effectively. Establish temporal boundaries by scheduling high-stimulation activities during your peak energy hours and protecting your recovery time with the same commitment you would give any important appointment. Your nervous system needs predictable periods of low stimulation to process the information it has gathered. This is core upkeep for your high-performance nervous system. Build a daily routine that starts with 30 minutes of complete silence without input from phones, media, or other people, then ends with 15 minutes of information sorting, where you mentally categorize what you observed, felt, and noticed into actionable insights versus background data. Practice deliberate exposure to controlled stimulation to build your tolerance for unavoidable overwhelm. Start with 5 minutes in environments that challenge your sensitivity, then gradually increase duration as your nervous system adapts. This builds resilience while maintaining your natural perceptive abilities. Channel your heightened perception into economic value by identifying the specific information you process that others miss. Your pattern recognition might translate into market analysis, trend prediction, or risk assessment. Your emotional sensitivity might become expertise in understanding customer needs, team dynamics, or organizational culture. Your environmental awareness might develop into skills in design, logistics, or systems optimization. Document your perceptive insights for 1 month, noting which observations prove accurate over time. This reveals the areas where your sensitivity provides genuine competitive advantage, rather than just interesting observations. Build professional capabilities around your most reliable perceptive skills. Stop managing your traits and start mastering them by treating sensitivity as a skill that improves with practice, rather than a condition that requires accommodation. Test your intuitive abilities with measurable outcomes by making predictions about situations where you can verify results. Track your accuracy rates and identify the conditions where your perceptions prove most reliable. Develop protocols for distinguishing between emotional resonance and projection, environmental sensitivity and anxiety, intuitive insight and wishful thinking. Your sensitivity becomes powerful when you can separate signal from noise consistently. Maintain progress by recognizing the difference between personal agency and spiritual bypassing. Personal agency means taking responsibility for developing your capabilities, regardless of external validation. Create accountability systems that measure your practical contributions rather than your spiritual insights. Track how often you use your sensitivity to solve real problems, help other people, or create tangible value. But what's the one mindset shift you need to stop spiritual bypassing once and for all? The shift happens when you stop seeking validation and start taking ownership. Your power was never about being chosen by external forces. It was always about choosing yourself and taking full responsibility for the gifts you carry. Stop waiting for the universe to validate your specialness through signs and synchronicities. Start demonstrating your unique capabilities through concrete actions that create measurable results in the real world. You've taken a journey through understanding your evolutionary wiring, building authentic community, and implementing practical frameworks. Understanding the science behind your sensitivity doesn't make you less spiritual. It makes you infinitely more powerful because knowledge creates options for optimization that mystical thinking never provides. Your neurological differences are tools waiting to be mastered, not burdens requiring divine intervention to bear. If you're ready to choose yourself daily, type "I choose me" in the comments below. Remember, your greatest power lies not in waiting for permission, but in acting every day on the gifts you already have.